well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Cam Edwards, your host. Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. I'm not going to strip for you, but I have a slightly subversive message here on my shirt. Yes, there you go. Get outside. You don't have to stand 3 feet away from somebody and cough and sneeze on them, but get outside. Enjoy some sunshine today if you can, for just a minute or two anyway. On the program today, Dave Kopel, Research Director at the Independence Institute, going to be with us talking about a variety of things, including whether or not a expected Supreme Court decision could provide some relief for gun stores in places around the country that have been ordered to close. Even in those states where gun stores have not been ordered closed, you are still seeing anti-gun politicians doing everything they can to try to impede the ability of Americans to exercise their right to keep and bear arms, particularly when it comes to acquiring firearms so they can keep and bear them. In the D.C. suburbs of Montgomery County, Maryland, the Montgomery County Council wrote to Maryland Governor Larry Hogan last week asking to make sure that gun shops are following social distancing orders. And that background checks for gun purchases completed in a timely manner. Council Vice President Tom Hucker said he saw photos circulated on social media of long lines out the door and around the block outside of a Silver Spring, Maryland gun store. Now, this was shortly after the restrictions about social distancing were put in place. This from My Montgomery Community Media. Interestingly enough, the owner of that store says, listen, that picture is several weeks old. We are following social distancing rules. We're not letting any more than 3 customers in a store at a time. And everybody is wearing masks. This was the Atlantic Guns was the store there in Montgomery County, and again, they're saying that everything is fine. He says background checks have been coming back within the required 7 days. He says this has not been an issue for us. Steve Schneider, the president of Atlantic Guns, says that the store has posted signs outside the building asking that customers maintain social distancing. Hand sanitizer is provided. The store is disinfected several times every day. Says their store hours have been reduced to about a third of what their normal hours are. But again, that's not enough for the anti-gun politicians in Montgomery County, Maryland, who would love to shut down that gun store if they possibly could. So we talked with Dave Kopel, Research Director, Second Amendment attorney and scholar with the Independence Institute, about these shutdown measures, about the growing discontent that we're seeing among Americans who are ready to get back to work. And again, whether or not the Supreme Court might have an opportunity here in the coming weeks and months to help set the record straight when it comes to our right to keep and bear and buy firearms. Take a look and a listen. Dave Kopel, how are you, sir? It's good talking with you again.
Doing great. Really happy to be talking with you and another human being face to face, even if it is only in 2 dimensions.
I know. It's funny that you mentioned that. We had a conversation with our mutual friend, Jim Garrity. I had a virtual happy hour with him last weekend, and I didn't realize how much I had missed just hanging out and talking with friends until I did that. So we are social creatures, human beings are. And maybe that's one of the reasons why, now heading into, I guess, the 6th week of our national emergency, you're starting to see more and more signs of people saying, listen, we got to get back to work. We want to get our lives, if not back to normal, at least, something that seems doable in the long term. I'm surprised. Are you surprised that we're starting to see more of these types of, protests and demonstrations and just more Americans saying, come on, we got to let up on this a little bit?
No, I think it was inevitable. And because you can't destroy people's lives and expect them to take it over the long term. I think, of course, at any large protest or when you try to agglomerate all the protesters together, there's a lot of diversity, and you have the jerks with stupid signs that, of course, the media is going to focus on and try to make them representative of everybody. But I think what's really most important to a lot of folks is the destruction of the jobs and the economy. You and I are still doing our jobs, and we're fine. Even though you are Mr. Farmville, your day job at least is a white collar job where you can do anywhere. But a lot of other people have lost their jobs, and they want their jobs back. They want to be able to make a living to support their family. This maybe they got some money from the federal government with that $1,200 check. Maybe they're eligible for the small business loan program, but the money hasn't showed up, or it's all gone. And in any case, they just want to be supporting themselves and their family instead of living in desperate circumstances. So I think that's the most important thing, that the economic shutdown has gone too far and it has unnecessarily destroyed too many jobs.
And sadly, I mean, some of those jobs are not going to be coming back. One of the things that I noticed yesterday, I was looking at a story about a rolling protest in Massachusetts that took place last Friday, and these folks started in one town. They drove to about half a dozen towns and stopped at gun stores in every town. Gun stores are closed in Massachusetts thanks to Governor Charlie Baker and Attorney General Maura Healey. And these were folks who were asking that these gun stores be allowed to reopen. Some of these gun stores are not going to be able to do that, Dave. In fact, in Massachusetts, gun stores, I found out, are not eligible for state funds, the state version of the Payroll Protection Act and the funds that are being released to keep small businesses open. Gun stores are not eligible under the mandate from the governor in the state of Massachusetts. And I have a feeling that anti-gun activists are going to be thrilled if when we do start to get back to normal, if some of these gun stores remain closed forever.
Oh, of course, and that's been their objective all along. I mean, we can talk about their Fabian tactics they've been using ever since they were formed in the 1970s. But yeah, wiping out the right to arms as broadly as possible it is the long-term strategy. And if you destroy gun stores, you destroy the chance that somebody in that town is going to be able to go buy a gun from somebody they know who would be a trusted mentor.
One of the things that you and I talked about last week when you were on the program, we mentioned some of the lawsuits that have been filed. I think we're now up to nearly a dozen around the country, most of them challenging the stay-at-home orders. We've got some lawsuits, one filed, I think, last week in Georgia, taking on a county that their probate judge decided they're going to just take a 2-month pause in issuing concealed carry licenses or even accepting concealed carry applications. I'm curious, because you're the legal expert here. Is there a lot of existing case law dealing with the type of situation that we find ourselves in? Obviously, we've got laws and lawsuits that have taken place over the years dealing with public health emergencies. But I mean, this country really hasn't found itself facing a problem of this scope and magnitude. So are courts sort of treading on virgin ground here when they're taking a look at some of these cases?
Yes, we've never had that. We've had national emergencies before, and like World War II was a pretty major one among others. But they are on virgin ground because a lot of these cases come out of somewhat different contexts of, can you have mandatory vaccinations, which the Supreme Court upheld many decades ago, and that, by the way, was at a time when not all vaccines were nearly as safe as they are now, and there was a much higher risk of side effects, but that they upheld the mandatory vaccines anyway. And of course, quarantine laws, in the sense of somebody is infected and they therefore have to stay out of public circulation, are very well established. Lockdowns, things like that, what we have de facto house arrest in a lot of states, that is new legal ground. What judges try to do is reason from the text of whatever the laws are, the constitutions to start with, state emergency powers statutes, a lot of which are based on a model pushed by the Bush administration after 2001. And then the basis of law is often reasoning by analogy or by implication. So it is new legal ground.
How much help has it been, going back, you mean to go back to 2001, go back to 2005, Hurricane Katrina. And in the aftermath of that and the seizure of firearms, lawfully owned firearms by the New Orleans Police Department, thousands of guns taken, maybe hundreds of guns ultimately returned to their legal owners. The National Rifle Association was very active, and state organizations were very active as well at the state level in pushing emergency power protection legislation. I think we've got it in 25 or so states, including in Virginia, which basically says, listen, if there is a state of emergency, governors cannot infringe on the right to keep and bear arms. I believe that that's the reason why Governor Ralph Northam has kept gun stores open in Virginia, although he's closed indoor gun ranges, declaring them to be places of amusement. But how much protection and how much help are those laws at this point in time?
A lot in some states, but I think it really varies state by state. And there's, as you know, there's a federal equivalent to that, which just says you basically can't, a program that gets federal funding can't use its, like a local sheriff's office or a police department can't use that funding to confiscate guns, which is definitely a good idea. And we haven't seen any of that. And some of the state laws might be as simple as what I just said for the federal law, or they might go further in the scope of their protections.
Okay.
But it's an example of how, preparedness is a good idea. And we were in 2005 and 6 and 7 in working to enact these laws. I don't think we anticipated a national pandemic caused by the Chinese Communist Party, but we were all of us in the gun rights movement were being cognizant of the need to be active and be protective. And some states did a great job on that. Others didn't, but it's really good we were vigilant back then.
Absolutely. But of course, the other side, I remember those debates, and the other side, oh, you're crazy. Listen, what happened in New Orleans was it was sort of a black swan event. It'll never happen. You guys are just paranoid. Nobody's coming to take your guns. Nobody wants to infringe on your Second Amendment rights. And as you say, listen, we've not seen any instance in the United States during this current national emergency where there's been any attempt to seize firearms. Instead, the effort right now in some places seems to be to prevent Americans from acquiring firearms. If you've got your firearms, so far you're okay. But if you want to become a gun owner, that's where you've got more and more of these. And unfortunately, it's exactly the places where you'd think this would happen. But you got more and more of these politicians saying, no, we want to prevent you from doing so. And again, these court challenges, to date, we still have a lot of lawsuits that have not had hearings on the request for an injunction preventing these stay-at-home orders from remaining in effect. Out in California, had a couple of judges, one federal, I think one state judge, basically come out and say, this is fine. The gun stores can be ordered shut down. Your Second Amendment rights are not being violated. And again, they're using that intermediate scrutiny, Dave, that standard of judicial review to say it's perfectly fine and appropriate for sheriffs to order these gun stores closed. We still have that New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus New York City case up in front of the Supreme Court. Oral arguments were held back in December. The expectation is that maybe by June we'll get a decision. I don't know if the coronavirus is going to impact that one way or the other, but looking at one of the issues in that case, we hope will be the Supreme Court addressing the standard of review that's being used in so many courts around the country. How big a deal is that argument of okay, well, what standard of review should we use when we're looking at these gun control laws? And do you think that in the case of these gun stores that are being ordered to close, would strict scrutiny, the highest standard of judicial review, would that make a difference as opposed to considering these stay-at-home orders under intermediate scrutiny?
It might well, but don't count on this as the magic bullet.
Okay.
Tiers of scrutiny are strict scrutiny, intermediate scrutiny, and there's a lot of flavors and variations within advanced constitutional law on that, are just sort of basically verbal formulas for how to do a balancing test. And in the hands of some judges, intermediate scrutiny is a thing where if the government comes in with some evidence, real evidence, not just speculation, but if they come in with real evidence, or in the view of some judges, if they come in with mere speculation and hand waving, that's enough to pass intermediate scrutiny. Other judges have been much more rigorous on gun cases and on other ones about holding the government to a higher level of proof. And in strict scrutiny is definitely a stricter standard of proof than intermediate scrutiny. But judges that want to let the government get away with it are going to be able to find a way to do it. So I think it's actually more important than the formal standard of review is, first of all, the signals from the Supreme Court that this is an important right that ought to be taken seriously. And that's not just, as we've seen, announcing Heller and McDonald and then the Caetano case, but more frequent attention to it as the court gives frequent attention to the First and Fourth Amendment cases every year. And appointed good judges.
Yeah, absolutely. So a quick follow-up on that. Again, I'm kind of asking you to read some tea leaves here, but in your opinion, one of the things that New York City did to try to avoid judicial scrutiny was they changed the law in question. And then they told the court, this whole case is moot because we've changed the law that was challenged and now everything's hunky-dory. The fact that we have not heard anything from the Supreme Court yet, does that make you think one way or the other that, the Supreme Court is going to reject this idea of the issue being moot? And that's why it's been, now 4 months almost since we've had oral arguments without anything coming from the court, or is that still a possibility that we'll wait 4, 5, 6 months? The court will come out and say, yeah, you know what, really the case is mooted based on what New York City did.
If the decision is, let's say the dreams of the gun ban groups come true, and Chief Justice Roberts joins with the 4 anti-gun justices who, at this point, really are. I mean, you can't get a fair shake from them on a gun issue at all. They're just adamantly never do anything supportive of the Second Amendment. If he did that, that would still be a complicated opinion that would take a lot of back and forth to write, and which would would draw a strong dissent, and it would take a lot of time to produce because it would be an advanced. It would settle a lot of things on mootness law. There's a lot of problems of the government strategically mooting cases. Somebody who's a prisoner sues that they're being denied, say, religious reading materials, and if they're a pro se plaintiff, that is, they're representing themselves, then the government, that federal prison will fight them in court, and of course they'll win because they have a lawyer, and the other side doesn't. But then if the prisoner number 2 is represented by, say, a religious liberty group like the Alliance Defending Freedom, well, then the government will cave immediately and they'll settle and say, oh, no, the case is moot, Your Honor. You don't need to do this. We have just given this guy a free lifetime subscription, to Fundamentals of Talmud Interpretation or whatever the book is he wants and magazine he wants to get. And they'll say it's moot. So don't decide any case. Don't make any precedent. And so they'll moot it out for him. And then prisoner number 3, who doesn't have the lawyer, he's back in the same boat. And so that's why the Alliance Defending Freedom filed a brief on behalf of the pro-gun side. It said, we don't have any opinion on the Second Amendment one way or the other, but this is a continuing problem. So will the court decide to validate those kinds of tactics on a national basis of strategic mooting to prevent civil rights cases from being decided, or not? And I think one of the challenges for the 4 anti-gun justices, some of whom, like Justice Ginsburg, are pretty strong on some other civil liberties, is if they allow mootness, strategic mooting, to be used as a weapon like this against the Second Amendment, it's very hard to write an opinion that isn't going to allow them that to be done against other freedoms that she does care about.
Talking again with our friend David Kopel, Research Director at the Independence Institute. Dave, listen, thank you so much for coming on the program today. I really appreciate you letting me talk with you about some of these legal questions. And next time, maybe we can do this later in the day, maybe after 5 o'clock somewhere.
That would be great. We could even have a cocktail.
We should do that. It could be a virtual ATF party. The Independence Institute throws a great ATF party each and every year, and we could try to capture some of that magic.
That would be super.
All right, Dave. Thanks so much for your time, sir. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
All right, time now for our good deed of the day, our armed citizen report. This one isn't really a recidivist report, but around the country, again, we're seeing court systems make some changes, and some pretty big changes when it comes to setting bond, things of that nature, because they're trying to avoid putting people behind bars at the moment in a confined space. We're told, nonviolent offenders, people who are with like 30 days left on their sentence, they're being let go. But we're told again that violent criminals are not a part of these new orders that are meant to reduce the number of inmates in these facilities. However, we know that that's not the case everywhere. The Davis Vanguard in Davis, California, Julieta Bisharan with a story out of Sacramento County, where the Superior Court there has seen a number of cases, including individuals charged with violent crimes who have been released on their own recognizance. One case in particular, just recently, charged with assaulting his former roommate, a guy named Justin Hart. He had his bail originally set at $50,000. According to the district attorney, Hart got into a mutual fight with his roommate, ended up using a wrench to attack his roommate. Defense attorneys argued that Hart be released on personal recognizance or have his bail set lower since he has no prior criminal history. He's only 20 years old. And the judge in this case said, quote, "I will release you on recognizance given the virus situation." Now, last time I checked, assault is a violent crime. Using a wrench to beat your former roommate is a violent crime. And yet again, because of the coronavirus, the judge there in Sacramento County, California said, all right, we'll see you back in court here in a few months. Don't beat anybody with a wrench in the meantime. Now, our armed citizen story actually also comes from Sacramento County, California. Wonder how long before this burglary suspect is going to be back out on the streets, taking a officer on a police chase before being shot by a homeowner there in Sacramento. A crazy story. This burglary suspect ended up trying to elude police, ended up going the wrong way down Interstate 80 in Sacramento County, and that is when officers actually called off their pursuit because they were concerned about what might happen to the other few folks out there on the road. So they broke off the chase. Guy ends up crashing his car a short time later and then takes off on foot, ends up going into a gated community. So much for the gate, keeping out the wrongdoers, and eventually was shot by a homeowner there in that neighborhood who felt threatened. That's where police actually caught up with the burglary suspect. The homeowner cooperating with police, not expected to face any charges. The burglary suspect is expected to face some charges. But again, given the situation in Sacramento County, where not only, by the way, are you seeing individuals charged with assault be released on their own recognizance, Sacramento County jail has let loose 400 plus inmates under a judge's order in the past month. And so, again, it may very well be that despite the severity of these charges, this suspect is soon back out on the streets, hopefully not behind the wheel, and hopefully with the understanding that, hey, when you try to break into somebody's home, guess what? Even in California, they might be armed for self-defense. Finally today, our good deed of the day from Kentucky. This from the State Journal in Kentucky, where a pizza delivery guy in the right place at the right time and willing and able to do the right thing to help out this woman during a hailstorm. I love these types of stories, by the way. This is not the type of story you'd find in the New York Times or the Washington Post. This is a small story, but it's big for Shirley Strucker. She was the woman in question, went to the store. She uses a walker. She said when she left the other day, sun was shining, birds were chirping, everything was fine. But as she was walking back, spring storm popped up, started raining, then it started hailing, and then Shirley Strucker fell to the ground. And she said, this gentleman just pulled up, stopped right in the middle of Shinkle Lane. She said he stopped traffic, picked me up, put me in his car, and took me home. That gentleman, Tyler Williamson, who is a driver for Pizza Hut, he was delivering pizzas back on April the 8th. He said it was raining and hailing when I saw her. She was walking up the street. I passed her. I turned around to the Shell station to see if she needed help, and that's when she fell. He said, I would have felt bad if I hadn't helped her. If it was my granny, I would hope that somebody would help her. The 24-year-old had just delivered a pizza when the rain and hail started. He said he had pulled over to kind of wait out of the storm. He said, I'm glad I waited because if I didn't, I might not have seen her. He said, I pulled up beside her to see if she needed a ride. She stepped off the curb. She fell. I put her and her walker in the car. A lady behind me called my work to let them know what happened. He said, I told her I kind of felt it was my fault because I distracted her. She said, no, there's no telling what would have happened if I didn't stop. Shirley Stucker says, he's not the reason I fell. She said, it happened so fast. My hair was falling in my face. I was hurrying. I was wringing wet. She said, I think that is why I fell. She had suffered a broken leg a while back. She's had to undergo several surgeries because of that injury. The fall caused one of her incisions to open, but she is okay. Neighbor helped nurse the cut. She did not have to go even back to the hospital to have it taken care of. Meanwhile, Tyler Williamson says if the situation that comes up again, he would do the same thing. He said, if I didn't help somebody who needed it, it would be on my conscience. He said, I couldn't do it. So, again, Tyler Williamson in the right place, at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing. And if you happen to live anywhere near the Frankfort, Kentucky area, and you're looking for some dinner, why not give Pizza Hut a call and see if Tyler's working? And maybe you can give Tyler, extra 10% or so in the tip. Tyler Williamson, today's good deed of the day. And that is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company. Now, tomorrow on the program, we're going to talk with our friend Amy Swear from the Heritage Foundation. She has a new project that she's been working on. They just unveiled this at Heritage. It is a database of concealed carry or armed citizen stories from all around the country, trying to keep track of everyone that at least makes the local media. And we'll talk with Amy about that, as well as bring you more of the day's top Second Amendment news and information. Also, tomorrow, going to be doing a VIP Gold Chat with my friend Ed Morrissey from Hot Air. You can find out more information at Hot Air at BearingArms.com. In the meantime, don't forget, you can subscribe to Town Hall Media on YouTube or Bearing Arms Cam and Company on Apple Podcasts. That way you never miss a program. We do appreciate your support. You can also become a VIP Gold member and take part in that chat coming up tomorrow. You can do that at Bearing Arms or Town Hall Media or any of the websites there. Until we talk again, be safe, be well, be free. And we'll see you here soon with another edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company.